This morning we are speaking with Jamie Twidale, the CEO of RSL Victoria, and very pleased to have you on our online program, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks for having me on, and well done for a lot of the interviews you've been doing lately. I've watched all of them. They've been quite informative, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that endorsement, Jamie. Today we are going to speak about the recent state executive communique that went out, I think, on the 30th of last month, and it covered quite a lot of ground, but it sort of brushed over a lot of things in terms of the detail, and hopefully we might be able to get into some of that with you and maybe sort of dive into a couple of hot topics as well that I think people will be interested in hearing about, things that are relevant, not just in Victoria, but also in other parts of Australia, particularly how, my pet project at the moment is looking at advocacy and how RSL plays its role as a quite a large and significant organisation in Australia around that area. So, first of all, can you let us know a little bit about what's happening and give us a bit of a summary of what's going on at state headquarters and, perhaps in line with the update?
Yeah, will do. Thanks, Mark. The communiques are a bit of a new thing. We only started those, I think, in around May or June. Traditionally, our way of communicating what's been going on at board level has been to publish the minutes a month after when they're approved, and that's not the best way to communicate. And the state executive communique really is just one more way.
The minutes do make for fascinating reading, though, Jamie, sometimes, but they do lack a little bit of context.
They do, and that's the double-edged sword of just releasing minutes without context. It's great that the board does that. It shows some good transparency, but things can be taken out of context. And the idea of the communique is to provide a little bit more insight without the stock standard, what item was discussed. It's still not what I would call best practice communication. It's a step in the right direction, along with our fortnightly e-news that goes to sub-branches now. But we do need to move into a more two-way dialogue at some point down the track. But we're an old and very history-steeped organisation, and we're moving along, but we definitely can do better. So I'd like to say that at the outset. This particular communique did cover a lot, because we covered a lot in the last couple of board meetings, and a few of those things came to a head in the last board meeting in particular. And the state executive is well attuned to the fact that there'll be a new board come the end of November. How much can they really get through now? How much should they be telegraphing that they've been talking about? And how much, because of COVID, can we not wait and move on with? So that's why I covered quite a lot of ground. A couple of the key parts there, the official launching of Veteran Central, which I know we're going to talk about later on in the presentation, so I won't go through that too much. It talked a little bit about where we're at with our strategy, and in particular that COVID has really pushed back our modernisation agenda by a long way. We've been building up a little bit of money over time, putting on more staff. The idea of 2020, 2021, 2022 was really to start to ramp up on a lot of those strategic things. And COVID has just pushed all of that back. We've had to focus on different things. So the item in there that talked about the roadmap, and there's a lot of roadmaps getting around at the moment, and we could have thought about better language, really is recognising that we need help to really push that along much quicker. And then of course we had some information in there about rule changes that are proposed for this year's annual conference. Okay,
and as you know, I'd like to sort of, with you, time permitting, deal with each of those in turn, but I guess a couple of comments from what you've said there. Openness is very, very important to the community, and I think and I mentioned this to you the other day when we were having a chat about, look, it looks like it's a bit reactionary, suddenly opening up because there's a lot of pressure and people are starting to demand it. I mean, is it a case of RSL listening, or is it a sort of a case of just reacting to the pressure?
A lot of the things that are happening now have been in the pipeline for 6 or 7 months. So the idea of Veteran Central, which we'll talk about in a minute, came out of an initiative in April. Next week, I think, actually on Friday this week, will be the announcement of the Veteran Employment Program, which looks like one more announceable. That's been in the pipeline for a long time. We were going to announce that in September, but we were a bit delayed with recruitment. And the modernisation journey and the strategy has clearly been in the pipeline for quite some time. It was presented at last year's annual conference. But the nature of COVID has kind of pushed everything to the back end of the year, and it's there. I think you're well worth noting that we get a lot of feedback from sub-branches, from all of the sub-branches. I get a lot of feedback that, gee, you guys are kicking goals in a few areas. Thanks for all the support you've been doing. And I get a little feedback that says, look, there's no substance. We haven't been consulted with what's going on. So you really do get both ends of the spectrum. Controlling how these things come out in the narrative is difficult when things get out, not necessarily as an announceable. Things have to go through minutes at certain points in time.
Isn't that potentially the problem with the approach that I guess you've probably just adopted, or you've fallen into, or you've inherited, or whatever it is? I don't know how it got to this. And it's certainly changed a little bit over recent times, but isn't that the problem with this approach? Because, everything has to be announced, or, in the course of things, if people understand what the priorities are and where you're moving towards and all it's the old mission command style of things. If you know what the intent is and where we're going, none of these things seem like a big surprise anymore. And the problem, I think, and the charge that's been put to you guys, and including by myself and other writers with AVN, is that the engagement has just been very low quality. And, it's not necessarily just, and I'll let you off the hook a little bit here, Jamie, it's not just your job as CEO to be in charge of that, because, you actually administer the headquarters, but there is an executive group and presidential role in doing that, and it's really fallen down. And I don't expect you to respond to that. It's probably a difficult thing to respond to, but it has to be acknowledged, and something has to be done to improve it. And I'd love nothing better than have the chance to speak to the president and potentially speak to the other presidential candidates as well. So, number one, I think people would see that there's an opportunity that, hey, look, they don't all hate each other. I'm pretty sure they don't, from what I've gathered from my conversations with each of them. And I think they've all got some sensible ideas that are worth sharing. And it's just a disappointment that unless you actually get that rare opportunity to speak with them, you really won't know. And I think that's a real shame.
Yeah, one of the biggest areas that we need to work on is how we have two-way dialogue. When we inform and when we consult, but really to lift the veil on what's going on. And without making excuses, that's made more complicated by our structures and our history and how we do what we've always done. But one of the biggest areas that we need to work on is how we do that. And putting stuff into minutes and into a communique is not good enough. We know that, and we'll work on it over time.
Well, I don't know if you've got a lot of time to work on it, because I think the pressure's building. And the other thing, Jamie, I want to just pick up on the point you're talking about. Well, COVID's sort of pushing things back. But I would suggest maybe COVID is a great catalyst for serious innovation and some real quick sort of design thinking style approaches to things. And I do worry that, with long-winded roadmaps and, top tier consultancies coming in and getting involved in things, that they sort of tend to like to fall back on what they know and trust, and the things that they can sort of bring their kids in to do while they're out there, doing the schmoozing, if you know what I'm talking about. So, I sort of wonder whether you've had a chance to really think about whether this is a really important time, perhaps even to do a bit of a reset and think about, we've got to do some rapid development here on where this is going and reset around the mission.
Yeah. So we've done that for the veteran services area. We have taken the opportunity with COVID to completely reset how the state branch delivers its veteran services. We do need to make that more joined up across the entire network over time. We're very close to getting to the point where we can start consultation on the new resilient veteran strategy. Hand in hand with that is the veteran central approach. One of the ideas of the transformation roadmap is to do just what you said, which is, the strategy calls for a multi-year modernisation program, evolution, but faster evolution than what we had been doing. What COVID does is it presents the opportunity to restart the conversation with the whole network about what is it you want the RSL to be. The consultancy is just a mechanism to help us initially get some money to do the work and maybe lead a lot of the consultation there. but it's the opportunity to reset that conversation, to have exactly what you just said. What do the members and the sub-branches want? Is what we've got now appropriate? Do we want to tinker with it, or do we want something new?
I'm disappointed though to hear that, Jamie, in the sense that I would like to think that you probably already know what the members want, and have a pretty good sense of that already. I mean, I know you've only been in the chair for a period of time, but to be clear, you know, it's what I mean. It's a member-based organisation. The executive committee is drawn from the member base, so they should have a very clear understanding of what's going on out there.
They do, but you've got to remember there's 27,000 service members. 25,000 or so of those are pretty firmly of what they want. They want what they've got now, and they want it to pretty well stay the same as what they've got now. A smaller percentage want something different. Now, I think what we need to do is actually ask the questions differently and have the conversations differently. If you look at the fact that only 3,500 of our service members are under 60, okay, the membership of 10 years from now is going to look different. So, yeah, I intuitively think I know what the broader membership wants. As a younger veteran, which makes me feel good because I don't feel particularly young, I have an insight into what the younger generation wants. But I think if, to quote some of the language I saw the other day, roll out the epiphany of some CEO, it's doomed to fail from the start. We have to have that conversation.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that insight, because I think that is a problem, and I think one of the things that I think people will be concerned about is that, you know, any signs of hubris coming from a headquarters is always a bit of a danger sign, and you know, and I think that with a I guess, as we've agreed or acknowledged, a need to improve the engagement framework, then, you know, those two things together, you know, cause some problems. And you know, we've got a three-way race for the presidency, the leadership at the moment. And the difficulty that I see with that is that we actually don't have a clear idea, not even from the incumbent, apart from a very short statement, you know, that goes on the one-pager type thing that they put in their election material. It's a real shame that that's all we get. I think we need to understand a lot more about them and what they're offering, and you know, get a sense that this is going to be okay regardless of what choice we make. And I don't think we've got that sense at the moment within the RSL. Going back to Veteran Central, and just have to acknowledge that it's the same name, maybe a different concept to what they've called it in WA. And I know that was just a happenstance. Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
You didn't flog it?
No, it's a funny one. When COVID really started to ramp up in early April, I gave a challenge to the headquarters team. I want you to contact every sub branch. I want you to contact every person on the state branch list, and I want you to centralise how veterans can contact the RSL, because the model that we have at the moment is a sub branch led model. Veterans contact the sub branch.
Yep.
Not all sub branches can do that 7 days a week. Not all sub branches have welfare officers or advocates. So over time, the state branch has taken a lot of that on itself, but it's kind of operated a little bit like a sub branch. So in that period in April, we were talking with the state government about how can we get better at this, and how can we connect some of the ESOs together so that the veteran doesn't have to go shopping to find out which ESO is going to give them the support that they need. And we came up with a call centre, which is a pretty simple thing. You know, you whack a few people in a room, you get some processes, a little bit better at how you do what you're doing. That evolved and lined up quite well with the Veteran Employment Program, which brought on case navigators. So then we brought on an intake officer and moved to a more holistic case management approach,
yep,
which we haven't done in the past. But because the call centre, which is partly funded by a generous donation from the state government of $100,000 over 1 year, is not an RSL thing. We're the ones taking the phone calls. We're the ones that are, you know, intaking the veteran. But we might connect them with Bravery Trust, or we might connect them with Legacy, or we might connect them with somewhere else. We might support them, or we might connect them with a sub branch or DBA, however it is. We didn't want to have a phone number that was 1300 RSL Vic, right? Because it's no longer. So the team came up with 1800 MILVET, military veteran.
Right.
When we brought the team on, the intake officers and the employment navigators, I didn't like the idea of calling themselves a call centre. So they'll give you the challenge, come up with your own name. And they came up with Veteran Central a week after we'd already bought the new phone number. We'd lined it up with the government to do the announcement because it's their money, but it's actually been in operation since May. And then I saw your video with John in WA. And I'm like, oh, the bastard must be bugging our office.
I mean,
so
they've got
a similar name,
yeah.
Actually similar kind of concepts.
Right. Is there, I mean, have you had, I mean, it sounds like there hasn't been a lot of cost collaboration with the other CEOs. Is there a reason for that, or is it just the timing issue, or how come there's those sorts of gaps, I guess, emerging?
It's a bit of a timing issue. Each state is, chalk and cheese. Completely different constitutional structures, completely different way that the state branches and the sub-branches.
But the mission's the same though, isn't it?
The mission is exactly the same.
Yeah.
Supporting veterans, advocating for veterans, and commemorating service. So they're the three tenets that I always talk about. That's what we exist for.
Mm-hmm.
And when you distill the objects, you'll end up on those three things every single time. But because we are completely different beasts, we've all got our own current COVID challenges. The comms is not there as much. I speak to the other CEOs every couple of weeks, and we've tried a few times to do like a CEO forum, and we've had a couple of those this year, but we just get stuck in the busyness. But we've all recognised that we need to get
and from experience, a lot of these forums, I'm not talking about your CEO's forum, I wouldn't have a clue about that, but some of the roundtables and the including the ones that are sponsored by DVA, are just massive. I've complained about them previously, and I'll continue to do so until I see something change. They're just massive gab fest, and they, little updates, and that's all it is. Jamie, what I'm interested to find out a little bit about, so you're talking about Veteran Central, and you're talking about call centre, and you're talking about case management. So you're ticking a lot of boxes. It sounds like it could be something that you could access almost from anywhere, which is good. But we talked about innovation, and I'm keen to understand what are some of the innovations that are being implemented, or you've come to, you're going to trial as part of the Veteran Central initiative.
Yeah. So innovation is a step we'll definitely get to. At the moment, we need to get our back of house working better. We've had an approach for a long time of very, very dedicated, hard-working, well-meaning people taking individual phone calls. Right? So the veteran knows somebody, they call an advocate who knows an advocate, and that's how it all kind of works. By centralising it under Veteran Central, we can intake the veteran, we can do that centralised case management. If you look at the wellbeing kind of wheel, do they need employment support, mental health support, do they need accommodation, do they need advocacy, what do they need? That for us is actually quite innovative.
Yeah.
And over time, we want to bring the sub-branch network into that formally. So Veteran Central does that. You've got the sub-branch network, which already does the social connection and to a lesser extent, advocacy where they have advocates. And of course, a lot of the sub-branches do direct welfare support as well. You layer on top of that the regional veteran centres, which are technically independent, but sponsored, for want of a better term, by RSL Victoria. And then our two trial wellness hubs, one in Warrnambool and one in the Peninsula. 2022 will bring on the Wodonga hub, which is coming from DVA money. We're in the 11th hour of finalising that work with Melbourne Legacy of the central hub in the CBD. What we're aiming for with Veteran Central is not a call centre. So you should be able to, in time, if you want to text. Some younger men like to text, they don't want to pick up the phone. There's quite a few mental health studies on that. I watched a good podcast, I think it might have been Beyond Blue or someone the other day that was talking about how younger men prefer to text. Eventually we might be able to chatbot for the very simple, just how do I find this sort of thing. We recently started online welfare applications through Better Impact. And in the first week, we actually had 5 people self-register online for the needs they want, whereas traditionally that's been phone call, fill in paperwork.
So it sounds like an important small step. One of the things I've noticed, over the last few months, there's a lot of reporting the statistics of veteran welfare, how many phone calls you got. And I just feel that they're potentially a little meaningless, because what's a phone call about is because they've, need to get a new, they've lost their pass card or something, or, they want to make it just a routine inquiry or phone the wrong number for a dinner appointment or something at a sub branch. How do you know that those sort of numbers are really telling us anything important? Is, I guess, one of the questions I've got.
So that's the $1 million question. So because we haven't, and I say we as in the whole RSL in Victoria, does not have a system for supporting, like a system of systems to support veterans. It's done in complete isolation in 277 sub-branches and in isolation at the state branch. We want to move to outcome-focused reporting metrics. We want to know what the outcomes were from the support provided to a veteran. Right? To get to that, we need to understand what it is we're doing first. So we're doing a lot of activity-based measuring in the first instance to better understand where the workload is, whether things are occurring. But that's on a clear trajectory to much more mature and more sophisticated reporting.
Yeah, because it almost looks like a bit of a statement of performance, and I'm not really sure it is a statement of performance at the moment, because we actually don't know what those measures mean. And it's a criticism, but it's something that I think is a relevant criticism.
I'm not sure it's a criticism, because beforehand, all we were reporting was how many dollars we spent.
Yeah.
So it is at least the very, and this is rudimentary. It's an indicator of workload. It's an indicator of how many people you're engaging with. It's not yet giving us the meaningful understanding of what. What is the outcome? But we're on that path.
So those numbers aren't the end game. It's part of a journey that you're going on to resolve these problems and understand the situation.
But we're getting great insights already out of those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
That'll help us work out where to put the resources, where to do those things. The team's starting to come up with as part of the case management approach, a triage system and an allocation of kind of category. So we'll be able to then actually categorize up these interactions by what type of support. Yeah. And that's a part of that evolution.
So part of this, I don't want to bore anybody who's watching this, but I'd imagine that some of this involves some sort of a technological support in the background, and some systems and processes to support that. That investment might be quite important as part of the enabling component of this vision that you've got.
Yeah, and there's two key elements to that. One is the clinical governance system in the background.
Yes.
Which we didn't have before. We brought on Dr. Carolyn Deans earlier in the year, which you're familiar with. She did some great work with Melbourne Legacy. She's a psychologist, and she's helped develop those clinical governance processes for the staff to protect their welfare. And of course, most importantly, that we're moving towards a best practice approach for supporting using trauma-informed practices and veteran-centered practices for the veteran. But from a systems point of view, we've got a client management relationship system at the moment called Better Impact, which is in essence a volunteer management system. Mm-hmm. So we've kicked off a project for a new CRM that hopefully will come in 2021, which will cover the full gambit of what the RSL does, from fundraising through to interaction management, through to case management, through to advocacy management, all of those systems. So we've just ticked that project off. Those things are not cheap, and I find that in my history or my experience with IT projects, you either go super cheap and try to fail early and just get something in that's better, or you take the time to really get your needs right. And even then, they're notorious for going over cost. We don't have a huge amount of funds. We'll leverage a little bit off the Wodonga business case should that be approved by DVA to fund a good portion of that, because that hub needs a CRM. And if that CRM can do the whole business, even better.
Okay, so you mentioned some of the risks with the project, and obviously implementing good and usable technology is often a point of risk, and it's often a point of frustration in the future anyway. I mean, some people will just never like whatever you implement. I've seen that 1,000 times. But it sounds like it's a vital component. Otherwise, to use an analogy, you've got all the information in people's field message notebooks all over the state and nothing nothing held anywhere central. It's just in the top of people's heads.
Exactly.
I'd like to know a little bit more about the risks, and one of the risks I think that you might like to address as part of that is we have an election coming up. There may be a change in leadership, and potentially comes with that potential change in priorities and maybe some adjustment to that vision. How does that factor into the roadmap, the plans that you've currently got in place? I mean, are they sort of universal and they're going to survive all that, or what's the situation there?
Yeah, but for the most part, they should be universal. We know we need to get better at veteran services collectively across RSL. We know we need to get better at data capture. We know we need to move to case management, and we know we need to collaborate more with other ESOs and government to put the veteran at the centre. So those things are pretty universal. One of the key roles of the new board is going to be to either reaffirm the strategy or to decide they want a new one. Ultimately, boards set strategy. So as the company secretary, that'll be one of the first things that I'll be talking with the new board about in their induction. Here is the strategy. Take some time. Do you want to refresh it? Do you want to endorse it? Or do you want to go for a whole new strategy? Based on feedback at the annual conference, we'll determine whether or not a transformation is what we want, or whether or not the new board wants to settle for a different approach.
I would argue that whether you want a transformation or not, you're going to have one.
Yeah.
You're in the midst of it now, whether you like it or not. It just depends how painful you want it to be.
Correct. And that transformation has to happen anyway. What that looks like is a completely different story, and the how and the devil is always in the detail. But we know we've got declining membership. We know we've got ageing infrastructure. We know that the federated model has its complexities. All of those things need to be worked on. We know the Constitution is old and outdated. It was pretty good for when it was developed. It served a purpose 10 years ago when it was redeveloped. Is it fit for purpose for now? Probably not.
So, speaking about the Constitution and the rules, what in the executive update, the communique, there was a list of potential rule changes. Now, some of them have been seen before, and I think it's like many ideas that I've heard a number of people say that they're the father of it. Despite where it all originated, what are those rule changes about, and and where and why? It's a bit late now to start working on it for this year, obviously. So, what's the pressure point, and I guess what's the likelihood, do you think, of these changes coming into force at some reasonable time frame?
Yeah. So there's a little bit of history there that explains why they've come about where they are now. So one of the strategic pillars in our strategy is constitutional change. A fit for purpose constitution for the organisation. I proposed to the board when I first came in, I think it might have been at the February board meeting, what we should take to this year's annual conference is a set of principles for what a new constitution might look like. And we were thinking, 10-point kind of principles. Is member-based what we want? Direct member voting, is that what we want? Sub-branch models, that kind of very high level, to get some broad agreement that that's the right path. And then over the end of 2020, 2021, work on a new constitution for presentation in 2021. And then, of course, COVID hit. All of that work got put on the back burner. So in consultation with the state president and the wider state executive at the last board meeting, we said, well, we're not going to get that through this year. There's been no consultation with sub-branches around rule changes broadly. What can't we live with until next year or the year after? And what we can't live with is what you've spoken about before, a state branch election process which doesn't allow the brightest amongst us to get through because the rules require X amount of years in various roles, and it reinforces, in fact, it denotes the gene pool to draw from. You can't hear from the candidates, they can't campaign, and having the CEO as a returning officer has a perception of bias. How could we do that differently? And how can we remove some of the administrative burden of sub-branches to hold general meetings, complete the ballots, when we can just go direct to the members and do it that way. So that's essentially what those remits are about. and the state president was of the view that that couldn't really wait another year or 2 years. Whether it gets through or not, I guess this is a difficult part of the way that our rules are written. You're not meant to canvass for a rule change. But how are we supposed to explain?
Well, it's a ridiculous catch-22, isn't it? I mean, the rules, the Constitution, as I read it, and I've had somebody who admitted to me that he's done this a few times, Andrew Donovan, that he's one of his little hobbies is to look at constitutions, and he thinks if you go back and have a look at the interview we discussed it, and he has looked at RSL Victoria's constitution, and he finds it quite extraordinary. So there's a lot of these catch-22s in there, but there's also a lot of room, I think, to manoeuvre around them. So for example, what is the definition of campaigning? And if we had, say, the three presidential candidates together having a conversation about what they see as the challenges of RSL Victoria and what they would hope to see as the priorities, would you call that campaigning if they all did it? How do you not have a sensible conversation about initiatives and programs going forward from the current president? Because he may be concerned that if we had that conversation, he might be accused of campaigning. I mean, that's ridiculous. And given the current situation, we've got this huge amount of time that's sort of dragging on with this election period and the uncertainties around that. That suddenly we've lost this line of communication. Well, I don't know if we had it, but we've lost this line of communication with the president, who is notoriously quiet on most matters. I've met him and he's a very nice man, but he doesn't. I guess he just doesn't want to come out and make a lot of public statements, which is one of the things that we really need to hear from those folk about what they're thinking, what they're doing. They don't need to be rock stars. They just need to speak to us, and I'd really love to see that happen at some point. So, there's ways of manoeuvring around these things. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, are we being smart enough in terms of dealing with the basket case of a constitution we have already? And I'm probably being a bit harsh, but there's things that we need to do, definitely.
Yeah, it is a catch-22 and a tricky one. So yes, we do need to be a bit smarter and communicating a little bit better through things like communicators and e-news and doing things like this helps a little bit. But we are kind of beholden to the rules. At the end of the day, they're the members' rules. So the members have a rule that says you can't canvass. And what canvassing means is campaigning to influence the vote of a voter. That's essentially what it is. So
it normally involves handing out leaflets and putting on advertisements and going and giving speeches and urging people to vote in a particular way.
Correct.
And urging a vote, not hey, this is who I am. That's not urging a vote. This is just saying, well, this is who I am, like it or lump it.
So that's the tricky bit. And once again, there's history, and there's many years of what's appropriate behaviour. I recognise that rule needs to go. Okay?
I mean, you could almost argue that I mean, if you want to be really silly about it, you could almost argue with the president putting a presidential notice on the communiques campaigning, because he's obviously getting his face and voice out there, et cetera, and these are all the wonderful things we're doing. Now, I'm not arguing that point. I don't think that's correct. I think we actually need more. I think we need more of that. But then, why? There also needs to be the opportunity for others to actually be seen and to to talk about the things that they think are important.
And like I said again, I can't answer that question as to you can or you can't. Other than to say, an incorporated association who willfully breaks its own rule, would be open to all sorts of challenges. So it's a tricky one.
Definitely.
I think the important thing for us is that we recognise that we need to do exactly that. At the very least, let's get that rule through at the end of the year, and then allow next year it'll be the two vice presidents will be up for re-election, for a much more open dialogue and the ability for candidates to talk directly to members.
So I think one of the things, Jamie, that I'd like to sort of probably start to close out on, I think that's been a really good conversation. I'm starting to get a sense of, I guess, your thinking at least, and I guess reflected in that is potentially some of the attitudes and the ideas that are coming through from the board, and coupled that with the communique, that's helpful. One of the areas, and we talked about it, is the advocacy side of things. Now, I mean, I just noticed a simple example. In the UK, they've just announced that the government is going to fast track employment interviews for veterans who they call the civil service, who want to apply for the public service, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the government's already selected and appointed these people, and even give them more stringent testing. Psychologically and so forth, and trained them to perform roles. I mean, you'd think that they would probably be quite suitable for just about any public service job at the right, within a band of grades or within their skill level. They probably just don't have the language in which to communicate their experience and skills. So I just sort of see something like that as a real practical thing to advocate for when we talk about employment. And you see things such as the what do they call it? I forgot. My brain's gone mush, mate. That document from the government that says, we're looking after veterans, and and you get the little lapel pin and all that kind of stuff.
The covenant, yeah.
The covenant, that's it. Sorry, I just had a washout. So with the covenant, you sort of look at the covenant and you go, well, what is it doing? I mean, the state government in Victoria, for example, just not to pick on them, but just to use it as an example, very excited about having, and grateful, I suppose, having the veterans getting involved in the various bushfire systems. They've done that over a number of seasons now, 5 seasons now. Obviously, COVID assist has also been a great thing that they've done. And, just as a small sort of token of appreciation of actually focusing on putting some real programs in place to help those who are transitioning out, because they have already provided service to the state. They are already government employees in a sense. So initiatives like that, I think, are really ripe for advocacy, and they're probably things that I'd certainly like to see the RSL push with state and federal government, because they've got the covenant. Even though some of us can't remember what it is, and I'll tell you why, because I don't think it's been that effective. And these sorts of things would make it effective. And I think the UK seems to, offer a good set of examples. And if you watch some of the initiatives and have a look at some of the initiatives that they've been doing over there, they've really taken it very seriously. So, I mean, I've had my little say about that, but what's your view on what can be done to improve advocacy in the RSL, and how will you get people involved in it? Because one of the challenges, obviously, is like constitutional change. Some people are going to love it, and some people are going to hate it. They're going to think that it's going to, erode, traditions and values or whatever. So, what's the plan to bring advocacy into the RSL, where you can actually agree on a set of priorities and initiatives that will actually make a difference?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'll just a quick touch on the employment one, though. First of all, the Victorian government does run a pretty good veteran employment program in the back end. It's had some pretty good results. They're particularly strong in trying to get veterans into the emergency services, police, fire.
So what are they doing, Jamie? Because it's not really apparent.
Yeah, so some of the things they do, and it can be improved, and in my role on the Victorian Veterans Council, I've advocated a little bit for some changes, and I'll follow back up because you've re-jogged my memory on that one. And a lot of it's small things. For example, veterans now, when you apply for the public service, there's a tick box that says I'm a veteran. There's meant to be preferential treatment for veterans at interview. The issue, though, and the hole in that process, from my experience coming from the public service just recently, is that the hiring manager, the person who's actually doing the hiring at the bottom of whatever department, sees veterans as something completely different than what the government does. So it gets lost. The idea is there, but the execution gets lost.
And the cynic in me, says that tick box just gives somebody a number to report. It's very similar, like the welfare numbers. We've increased the number of percentage of veterans, and but they actually haven't done anything. All they've done is just recorded the fact, after the fact, and that's not particularly helpful. And I think that it's not genuine. You know, it looks good. It might be a good step, but it's
I
got to
think
be backed up with something else. You know,
I think it is genuine from what I saw inside the public service. I saw people from Department of Premier and Cabinets from the Minister's office out and about meeting with CEOs. Met with the CEO of my business that I was in last, pushing veterans and why aren't you employing more veterans and those sorts of things. But having said that, there's a lot more that could be done.
But without a clear set of guidelines that says this is how it works, right? You can say, well, why aren't you doing this? And we favour veterans. I suspect that a lot of veterans will be concerned about, well, gee, if I tick this box, are they going to think that I'm some sort of a, you know, hothead Maddie with PTSD and they're not going to interview me, right?
So
the prejudice issue.
Here is half the problem with the image of the veteran.
Yeah.
So you have two images of veterans. The strong, resilient, could go through a whole lot, has skills to bring, is an amazing employee view of a veteran, and the wounded digger. So these two views often compete. In the public
so this comes down to what's the job of the RSL to actually present the right view and improve that, and to put some structure around these initiatives. The tick box initiative. I just look at it from where I sit, you know, from afar, and I think this thing's just silly. I mean, unless you've actually got some serious guidelines that actually requires a certain set of action, there's a process that goes with it, not just let's tally it up at the end of the year and, you know, congratulate ourselves from employing some veterans because they bothered to tick the box. You know, these are the things that there's these unintended consequence type issues, and they do require very careful consideration and advocacy. And I can imagine, you know, a bright public servant never really had much to do with the military, thinking, oh, this would be a great idea, because they don't understand these issues that we and I have been talking about and have a greater, I guess, appreciation of the nuances and the problems that, and I guess the second guessing that must go on with people about whether they want to tick that box or not.
Yeah, so spot on. So that is where the RSL definitely needs to have an advocacy role. Advocacy, big A advocacy, so, you know, advocating on behalf of an entire cohort of people, in this case veterans, is one that we need to do. I talked before about, you know, engagement being high on the priority list. Advocacy sits at the very top. Our approach at the moment to advocacy across the RSL, you know, is individual members talk to their sub-branch talks to their region talks to the president or the state executive, or issues are brought up at the annual conference once a year. Sitting behind that, the state president is very, very active in a whole bunch of advocacy things, but it's also not seen. There's not a huge amount of two-way dialogue with members. And once again, we're a victim of how we've always operated. Now that's the scene. That doesn't excuse the fact that we need to advocate more. But in advocating, what we need is a much more streamlined approach, much more two-way dialogue, a much better set of principles about what do we advocate for and what don't we advocate for, being really transparent and open in saying we're for this, we're not for this, and this is why. And of course, underpinning a lot of that with evidence base, and where there isn't an evidence base, you know, trying to support the research that needs to be there to do that. So one of the things that we're doing at the moment, I've commissioned a discussion paper internally, which will be, it's very close, it's in its 99% completed, almost ready for consultation bit, to have that conversation internally across the whole RSL about what is it we want from advocacy and how do we want those systems and structures to work better, more dynamically and much faster and much quicker. If I get that through the board next month and they're happy with it to go to consultation, that'll go out through regions and sub-branches and members. And structurally, here's some of the issues. So I can have a view as the CEO of RSL Victoria, but if it's not endorsed RSL policy, it's not appropriate for me to just go, I think this is important, and off I go.
Yeah.
So we need to have a much more dynamic and faster approach to developing what those policy positions are, agreeing those policy positions, and then a much smarter approach to going, well, what's our advocacy strategy? Is this soft advocacy? Is this behind the closed doors advocacy? Is this something we want to go out on the front foot on the media? to advocate about, and really having those processes work better.
So regardless of whichever it turns out to be, that there is it's been a theme of this conversation, I think there is a need to establish and build the communications channels. We're talking about serious two-way communications. But one of the things I wanted to pick up on is just something that occurred to me the other day looking at the objectives of the RSL. It differs quite significantly from other club type, association type things where the objective and the mission is often about the members, where the RSL mission is about veterans, all veterans, not necessarily members of the RSL. And I know that's one of the principles of the RSL will help veterans, whether they're a member or not, which I think is a terrific part of the ethos of the RSL support program. So that advocacy also needs to take into account the needs of people who actually aren't members of the RSL, and they're out currently, from what you've described before, they're outside of the chain of the communications as well. And you know, I think those things probably need to be considered as just sort of as a side point to this discussion, because I think if you're not doing that, then you're not being true to the mission either. So there needs to be something broader other than outside the members and through the formal channels and so forth.
You've hit on a couple of good points there. So 50% of the people that are supported by the state branch, but I don't have stats for the sub-branches, are non-members. So they're not members of the RSL, but of course that's what our organisation exists for. In resetting the how we do advocacy and the system approach to it, what we need to do is, more than likely create some kind of a subcommittee of state executive, some reference groups that should have a mix of member and non-member representatives on it, because we do need to talk with and to the wider veteran cohort, whether they're a member or not, to understand what the full views. If we're going to be the organisation, we are the organisation that represents veterans in Victoria, then we need to talk with all veterans in Victoria.
And I guess there's the other challenges. I mean, you've got the tricky issues of current concerns. That, for example, you put a paper out with or communique about the call for a Royal Commission veteran suicides and the RSL Nationals position and so forth. I mean, I just can't see that that's settled in the veteran community about that. And you can't really take a position on that without actually having even shown or demonstrated any kind of consultation. So that's the first point. And I guess the other thing is there is a part of the response in that paper that RSL assumes that it is the representative of veterans or the preeminent representative of veterans in Australia, but I think it's still got to do some way to actually earn that position, and to take that position. Because if it's not doing the job, but it's taking that or assuming that position, then potentially closes out other voices that ought to be heard and have a legitimate right to be heard as well.
Yeah. So the RSL is the voice for veterans, and we are the oldest and the longest running. We're the largest ESO. We provide more direct support to veterans than any other ESO. In fact, you could add most of them together to get that. But I totally agree that we need to get better at how we consult. We have that position, but it's at risk. We need to earn it consistently every year, year in, year out. Our advocacy voice is behind closed doors at the moment. It needs to be much more open and vocal. And I really do hope that this discussion paper resets that conversation. Another key issue for the new board when they come in will be to go, right, that is what we want from advocacy. Let's make it happen.
And I suppose if you start performing on these things and delivering on these missions, these visions and the mission, obviously, you would expect that the support and the membership base of the RSL actually might enjoy some benefits in terms of an increase in membership and increasing in members who are actually interested and willing to be engaged in the league. And I think that would be a good thing overall.
Agreed.
Jamie, we're getting close to the end, and I know it's been a long discussion, and I've thrown a few tricky ones at you, and I'm glad that you've stuck it through. One of the things that I think is it's a tough one, and I've spoken to just about everybody about this in Victoria in particular. It's just this, the problems within the I guess the schisms that exist between the groups and the members. We've obviously got a very vocal group of reformers who are really working to do things that they really believe are very important. And I think some of the things that they're focusing on are very important. And you know, some would even argue that they've actually had some positive effects, but also at the same time, some of the actions of some, and I'm not saying necessarily that group, but other people under the name of whoever they say that they're representing, have also hurt people as well, you know, in terms of, you know, said things and that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of friction, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say, within the Victoria Network and amongst the members. And there's obviously some camps forming, and some of them may only be a small percentage of the membership in this situation, but there is still, you know, that conflict and that friction, and it's pretty serious in some respects, and it's quite damaging, not only to the brand of RSL, but also to the people involved. So, you know, as a CEO of the state headquarters looking at this and about to have a new or renewed board elected, what are the steps and the sorts of things that you think you can do to help bring that together and I guess probably soothe some of those old wounds and you know, try and find a greater level of unity?
Yeah, good question, Mark, and more than happy to go there. So it's simple, yet it's really complicated. So at its simplest form, these different groups, you know, whoever they are, and there's multiple different, you know, collectives and different views across the RSL, at their really core, 100% agree on the same thing. 100% agree. You know, we all agree, if you pare it all back, that we are about supporting veterans, advocating for veterans, and commemorating service. We all want those three things. We all agree that we want, you know, better transparency. We want a better run organisation in its entirety. And we want to focus the organisation more towards those three things. Where the conflict comes in is, on one hand, you've got some members that really want to hold on to the traditions and the ways of operating like we always have, and change comes slow and hard in some of those areas. And then we've got others that are completely impatient for change. They want it now, and are quite happy to throw out some outrageous accusations to get that change. That's a pendulum. Yeah, what we need to do is meet somewhere in the middle. You know, on this side, some of their views are, you know, I'm in complete agreement with. You know, things like you know, reform to the Constitution, better use of our resource base, being more tech savvy, including the younger generation. You know, the state president, you know, agrees with those things as well. But you've got to bring 95% of the organisation across at the same time. So it's the hard part. This is where it gets complex. Is having those adult conversations without name calling, without trying to find the gotcha moment that brings the house of cards down. And there is no gotcha moment. That's the first thing I did when I came here, is went looking for the dead cats. They're not there. We can get better at how we organise, and I accidentally sometimes stop calling ourselves a charity and call ourselves a business, and I've got to stop doing it, because we're not a business, but we need to operate like a business.
So but you are a for-purpose organisation. It's not just, you're not just raising money for the sake of raising money. Yeah, exactly
right. So I want to run the organisation, you know, much more professionally, much more transparently, much more like a business, where we could do those business activities, but never losing sight of the purpose of why we exist, which is those, you know, key three things that I talk about. What we need to do is, each group needs to just put aside the rock throwing and actually make a genuine effort to come to the table and have a conversation.
So my question to you, though, Jamie, is, hey, I mean, that sounds like, who's going to facilitate? How are you going to facilitate that? That's what I want to. I mean, is that something that you have to play a role in, or are you just sort of going, well, I'm waiting to be invited, or what's your?
I've tried on multiple occasions to have that conversation. I've sat on the couch with some of those people having beers. When I first thing I did when I came in, and I said, look, you know, how can we work together to get the same outcome? The other side is a little bit of a different kettle of fish, and that's much more, you know, face-to-face engagement and slowly bringing them along. I think at the simplest, it's everyone put their hand up, and in our transformation, in our recognition of the things that we need to do to change, we're putting our hand up and saying, we know we need to change, we know we need to do things differently. We know the membership is declining, we know the asset base is declining, the cost of the RSL is rising. Hand up. Got those things.
Yep.
Some of these other groups need to put their hands up and say, look, some of our tactics and approaches are not appropriate, we're going to knock them off. But we would like to be a part of the conversation.
Yep.
Being a part of the conversation is not, we demand absolute, we must have a seat at the table and be involved in all decision making. Because we're a member-based organisation, the members elect the representatives. But that doesn't mean we can't all sit around the table and share ideas and share dialogue and take each other into their confidence and trust. And this is what it comes down to basically, is trust. Everyone's got to trust each other. For us to move forward as one collective team.
Well, Jamie, if it would be of any assistance, Avian be happy to moderate any sort of conversation or series of conversations to that aim at some point. But look,
and I think the next step is probably when the new board comes in. I can't see it happening between now and then, and theoretically, you could have 50% of the board change theoretically.
Yeah.
I would expect not only in resetting the strategy and having a look at future direction, that whoever is on the new board and whoever is the state president, whether it's Rob or Glenn or David, should be looking at that as a pretty high priority and start the journey of healing and working together.
So there's a lot of work to be done in that area alone, let alone the roadmaps and the other strategies. It seems to be a precursor to achieving any of that, because without that support, you won't get those plans through in the long run anyway.
Correct. And let me say, just before we sign off, we talked before about advocacy. We want the members to advocate within the organisation. We want the members to say, I don't like this, I want it to change. Because that tells us where we're off track. A lot of that can't be done through formal systems and structures and committees and all the rest of it. And it really is about doing that in a respectful way, and us listening, honestly listening and making an effort to address those concerns.
Well, Jamie Twidale, I think that's a great place for us to end the interview. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Mark. It's been a great chat. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.